A big welcome to everybody, and thank you for giving up some of your time to join me this morning. We are just doing a quick 30-minute session on what 4 Dimensions is, and this is for principals and leadership teams to have a look at whether this is something that might align with your school direction, or if it is something that you might want to bring in for the work that you're going to do with your teachers. So we'll go through the PowerPoint. Any questions, please feel free. My email address, you have it through this link, or it is on the last page as we go through the PowerPoint. Very welcome to contact me. There is also a list of principals there that you might find you can connect with. Again, do that through me. And you're welcome to have conversations around what this is, ask questions, or send me an email to find anything or any information to be clarified. Okay. So what is 4 Dimensions? I'm Dr. Caroline Blackley, and 4 Dimensions is the framework that I created through my PhD. I started with Monash University in Melbourne and finished my PhD with Patria Redman and Karen Peel at the University of Southern Queensland. So firstly, why would you even step into looking at the 4 Dimensions? Firstly, I am an endorsed preferred supplier through the Department of Education. It's not a small process. Anyone who has SOAs, you certainly know that it's a 3 to 6 month process and they go through everything. So why has the Department of Education supported my work and listed me as a preferred supplier within Queensland? Firstly, my work is internationally recognised. From conferences, Dublin World Congress of Education, I was invited to speak and present my work. From ACEA, ACERA, beta conferences. Basically, what happens is when you present your research on an international stage, it is placed under scrutiny that you don't always get when you are just doing workshops. Because when you do workshops and people come to see your work, it is very much a interest-based to start with. Whereas when you're on the international stage and people scrutinise your research, it adds rigour, it adds intensity to further research, and it certainly makes you justify the findings and how they came to be. So the second thing is that my work is research-based within Australian schools, and the initial sample size was within Queensland schools. I do work from, well, internationally, but nationally, Tasmania, South Australia, Northern Territory, Queensland, New South Wales. But the sample size that we used originally was from Queensland state schools, and the rest is an Australian sample size. So as far as I know, this is the only research-based program, or it's not really a program, framework, that is based on Australian sample size. Evidence-based, we have now done over 30,000 observations in classrooms, each of a 30-minute duration. That's a lot of time in classrooms watching teachers teach that can provide you with the patterns, the data, the information that shows you what teachers do differently that have classrooms with less disruption, which means greater teaching and learning. Publications is the last that I'm just going to share on this slide. I have been published. Obviously, PhD goes through high scrutiny. But more than that, I have articles published, Q1 journal articles, which means 10%, top 10% within the world. They have been blind peer reviewed, so no one knows that I've written them when they go in, and they have been accepted, and that is a very rigorous process to have articles published. The one that you can see, teacher decision making in the classroom, and my work started with cognitive load and affect. So what is my work? 4 Dimensions is basically, we look at teacher decision making. This is not a behaviour framework. This is how teachers make decisions to create the work, the environment they want to work in. 4 Dimensions looks at the patterns in the decisions we make and how those patterns of our behaviour impact the classroom. Obviously, Paul Dix influenced the work, and we will have a look at that in a moment. The biggest thing to be aware of with bringing something like this framework in is that change doesn't happen by chance. So I say to the teachers when we work with them, if you are not happy with the behaviour you see in front of you, then it is you that needs to change what you're doing, look at new ways to work. They talk about, I had a teacher this week, it was wonderful, talk about being the investigator, being like Sherlock Holmes, rather than the prison warden. And what they meant by that is, how do you be the sleuth that looks for change intentionally and not by chance through intentional work? So why look at it? Research-based. As I said, in Australian schools, it is a simple 3-step process. We talk about the strategy that underpins 4D and how teachers use that in their classrooms. It's based in decision-making and the formation of habits. So any time that you want to change a habit, it's almost harder work than the creation of a new habit. Anyone who's played piano or been an athlete, if you get it correct the first time, it's much easier to play the complete piece. Once you've hit a note incorrectly, it can take multiple times to realign those neural pathways to get it right or to get it better. It's relevant and it's very easily implemented. In all the schools that we work in, teachers can walk away from a one-on-one observation or one of our workshops and implement the work immediately. As I said earlier, Paul Dix talks about when the adults change, everything changes. My work aligned very much with his thinking. If you read this book, it's a great book to read. It looks at how the focus is not on the students, because what's the best example? You can have, or you will have, a student in your school who misbehaves in multiple teachers' classrooms, and yet they will behave with one teacher or that teacher. So what my research looked at is, what does that teacher or those group of teachers do differently, not better and not worse? What do they do differently that brings out a classroom or an environment in which teaching is easier to implement? So what's the framework? Underpinning the 4D framework that we use in schools for observations is the decision making. So the beautiful thing, and the reason this is implemented so easily, teachers do not need new skills. The work that I did and the research I did when I first interviewed thousands of teachers, whether they were positive Pollyannas who love their job or negative Nellies who can't wait to leave our profession, everyone spoke about just 4 things. They are the 4 dimensions. So the skills that teachers use are the same. What we're training in this program or this framework is the knowledge behind how classrooms have changed since the 1990s. The essential skills classroom management were brought in 1996 into the classrooms, and what they did and the impact they had that was outstanding in 1996, even the mid-2000s, no longer have the same impact. So we bring current research into application of the skills you already have. That then feeds into, when you have the knowledge, you have a chance, Maya Angelou's work, you have a chance to intentionally change, look at alternatives and interact differently. That then feeds into deliberate practice. We talk about intentionality of change. This is chosen. Teachers who want to see the difference, they want to teach in classrooms with less disruption, they need to make a definite decision that they will implement and do things deliberately. That then feeds into awareness. When we know what we're doing, both positively to create the environment we want and negatively that takes away from the environment we want, we can then reflect on and reflect in. That's the most important difference to our work. The 4D framework is so simple. Teachers can reflect in their practice at any given moment and change the outcomes. How do we create that awareness? We do that through 4D classroom observations, which is a single sheet that looks at what teachers are doing in their classroom. As I said, it's about decision making. When we change the way as the adults in the room we interact, then we also change the culture within where we work. So the choices that inform our decision making are and always have been based on our prior experiences. What's interesting for teachers is many of our prior experiences are not just in the form of classes we've taught or schools we've worked in or mentors we've worked with. We had 12 years of experience as students sitting in classrooms, and that is often our biggest predictor of our values that underline what a classroom should look like. Knowledge and skills. Teachers need the knowledge, and when they're given the knowledge and skills, this creates and raises accountability and responsibility for the work that we do as teachers. And the last thing, which was my research, which was new, there's not been research done around this in classrooms, was the impact on cognitive load and of affect. So what is 4D? Quite simply, that's them in front of you: expect, reinforce, redirect, and follow through. They are not a Jenny Craig version of the essential skills of classroom management. So Christine Richmond she created with a team, pulled together 10 skills that she observed and her team of teachers using in classrooms way back in the 1990s. Mark Davidson then used those 10 essential skills to become the foundation of classroom profiling. When I have teachers that say, oh, same, classroom profiling, ESCM, they absolutely are not. So how did we come up with the 4 dimensions? I interviewed over 3,500 teachers. In a survey, the first question was, do you like your teaching or not? Positive Pollyannas on your right, negative Nellies to your left. I thought there would be a correlation for the teachers who said they love their job and less disruption in classrooms. There is none. So just because we enjoy our job, which often is reflected in other professions, it does not mean that we are going to have less disruption. Second question, talk to me about what you do in your classrooms. Of interest again, every teacher went straight to behaviour management. One of my assumptions when we do training is teachers are doing what we ask and what we train them to do. When we train teachers in things like the Essential Skills Classroom Management, where Lorna Hepburn and her team, 3 of them wrote an article in 2020, talked about the reactive nature of many of the essential skills of classroom management. So for example, cueing with parallel acknowledgement. We interact with a student with the intention when they're off task, others around will come on task. So for us to respond using some of these redirections, it requires disruption in the first place. 4 dimensions, when we ask teachers, talk to me not about your behaviour management, but talk to me about how you create the environment in which you want to work. Here's the third thing that was interesting. Every single teacher, and I'm talking millions of bits of data, when we used NVivo to pull the data together. Millions of bits of data were pulled together, and what we found is every single teacher spoke about those 4 things. Dimension 1, expect. Dimension 2, reinforce. Dimension 3, redirect. And dimension 4, follow through. What these are, they can be applied to any interaction with adults, children, parents, community, you name it. Let's take an example that's a little bit far-fetched. Okay, intimate relationships. Do you have a partner? I certainly have a husband. What you and your partner do in your intimate relationships may be very different to what my husband and I do. That's dimension 1. Our expectations have clarity, but they may not be the same as the person that is next to us. If my husband pleases me and our relationship is pleasant, I'm going to reinforce that behaviour, dimension 2. If my husband is not pleasing me, I'm going to redirect his behaviour. And I can choose to do that remains or retains the flow in our relationship or interrupts and possibly damages it. Then the final dimension 4, if my husband really is not pleasing me, he's sleeping on the couch for the night because I have followed through. So dimension 1, 2, 3, and 4, the 4 dimensions can be applied to any interaction that we have with another human being. In classrooms, we use them to create patterns. We look at patterns of teaching, not teacher observations. We look at teaching, the practice of, and we look at what teachers do differently. So 4 dimensions is simply the language of the practice of teaching. The 4D framework is the difference in that practice. What we found, we then went out and observed thousands of teachers, 30,000 now plus, and what we found was there was a common pattern for teachers who had less or no disruption in their classroom. Basically, their interactions, teacher-student interactions, sat with 80% in what we call the green zone, dimension 1 and 2. It does not say anywhere in my work that we don't use amber interactions. What teachers that have a different classroom or a classroom with less interruption do, dimension 1 and 2, 80% of the time. And when they use dimension 3 and 4, they have a quick bounce back to the teaching and learning as the focus. All right, what does that look like in a classroom? In just the short time we've spent together, we've talked about green and amber. Green zone, dimension 1 and 2, amber zone, dimension 3 and 4. On this graph, the green zone is only dimension 2 and the amber is only dimension 3, because these are the interactions we see in the classrooms. You can see this school in February 2021, they started with only a 37% green footprint. Now, most schools we start in are around 30 to 40%. So what that means is we have trained teachers through the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years to use redirections. Nothing wrong with that. When I was at school, if you redirected me, not only did I change my behaviour very quickly, but students around me did the same thing. That does not work anymore with the same impact. As you can see, within 12 months, if you scoot to February 2022, they had doubled their green footprint nearly. What that means is if I'm walking through that school in February 2021, exactly 63% of interactions I hear teachers having with students is around inappropriate behaviour. Move forward just 12 months, and that has shifted to 62% of interactions are with students around learning and appropriate behaviours. So within 12 months, and there's not a school that we cannot move and shift this data within 6 months, you can see their 6-month scan at July 2021 was sitting at 56%. Teachers will do the work that saves and reduces disruption and saves the flow of teaching and learning if we give them the new knowledge to do that. The impact on beginning teachers in less than 3 months. As you can see, 2 different schools. The top one, April 2023, these guys had a 34% amber footprint, public redirections, which means that, add that with all, so when you see the bright amber, that is public redirections. The lighter orange is I'm redirecting behaviour and talking to you about behaviour. And the lighter yellow is I'm redirecting behaviour, but I do it through curriculum, so no one in the classroom is aware of that. So you can see just within April to June, they went from 38% curriculum conversations to 70%. The guys down the bottom, they may not have got to 70% at the end, but if you look, they went from 50% amber interactions and they reduced that to 21%, public redirections. Does this work? Absolutely. Does it change classrooms? Most definitely. And the intention behind the research for me was to reduce teacher burnout, fatigue, and exhaustion. That's the cognitive load and the positive or negative affect. Know thy impact. When we link and think of Hattie's work, when you look at this with just the amount of information I've given you, quite simply, which school do you want your child attending? Which school do you want to be working in? The school on the right is Springshaw State School out at Emerald, and Renee leads her team. I've worked with them for a few years, and their challenge, while they sit now on an 80% green footprint, their challenge is to maintain that. They do that through us visiting every year to do an external scan. Their staff are trained and they have beautiful staff within there. Rebecca O'Grady works with teachers consistently on what that looks like and how to maintain it. The work is not easy, but neither is the work of burnout or redirection. Okay, what it looks like in action. Simply, when it's implemented, and high fidelity is the word. So if people say doesn't work, just like they used to say, oh, those essential skills don't work, they absolutely did back in the 90s and the early 2000s. So does this if you implement with high fidelity. It doesn't happen through a one-off PD or a one-off workshop. So what happens? Increased time focused on instruction, improved social and emotional wellbeing. Most schools put the 4D work under staff wellbeing. Positive and respectful relationships among students and staff. Improved environments for teachers to teach, model and respond. And that links to respect and modelling the behaviours I want to see and I expect back from you. Predictable learning environments. So we know what to deliver and we know how that will be responded to, and reducing problem behaviour. The schools I work in can show a correlation between things like one school data, referrals, reduction, significant, that aligns with the introduction and training of the 4D framework. How does 4D work? It is not a new program. We found it literally in classrooms. Teachers are already doing this. So when we do the work, there'll be at least a third of your teachers in schools that say, this resonates. What is powerful around that is that now it's research backed and it tells them why it resonates and why it works. It sits, and there are many programs, etc., I have not put in that circle, but it sits as the language that we use for all other programs. 4 dimensions is the language of practice. If you remember our earlier slide, it's the language of how we operate. It is who we are. It is a way of being. Here's an example at Kerwin State High, and Heather Murray is the principal. I've worked with Heather now across 3 schools that she has led. You will see the blue circle. That's not on their placemat. I've added that. When they created this placemat, 4 dimensions sits above all of their signature practices, because 4 dimensions is the way she expects her staff to operate, that they will be within their classrooms. Heavy green footprint, amber when you need it, and you bounce back to a curriculum focus. Positive behaviour then sits under that. And then you've got your restorative practices, including trauma-informed practices, and then you can see the pedagogical framework. It's not about what comes first, second or third. It is about a realisation that if staff aren't interacting with a culture of teaching and learning, you will consistently struggle with all else. On the right-hand side, you can see the strategic alignment and you can see the impact on learning, including the reduction in SDAs, reduced one-school referrals and improved wellbeing for both teachers and students. So what does 4D look like in schools? Our schools that have great success have us come in at least once or twice a year to do a whole school scan. You are never an expert in your own backyard as much as you know the work. So the schools that have success have us once or twice a year. We do a whole school scan and we'll look at that data in a moment. Over the first year or two, they train everybody in level 1, and the purpose is not so they observe others, although you can, and it certainly is wonderful to watch others work. The purpose is to create a common language that links to accountability and responsibility, and to create an ability to reflect in your practice, not just on your practice through conversations with others. Within the second year, third year, we build a level 2 team. And what happens is between the 2 terms that we are there doing external whole school scans, you have a coaching or a collegial framework that your staff internally do a coaching cycle. And obviously I do that training or members of my 4D team. So what does the sheet look like? As I mentioned earlier, I have been a part of classroom profiling. I linked to the work of Christine Richmond and Mark Davidson. I was a very proud classroom profiler. It was a wonderful time in my life, and I'm so grateful for the work I did with Davo. Does the sheet look similar? Absolutely, because he created an A3 sheet, and what teachers can do is align it from scan after scan to see improvement, challenges, celebrations. Is the cover the same? Absolutely not. The cover is my PhD and a snapshot. So the front sheet, which is on your right-hand side, they're the 4 dimensions. On the left-hand side is how the environment is created and the 3-step process I spoke of earlier, instruct, scan, interact, you can see in the green. That is the 3 simple spots for decision-making that can change what teachers do and how they reflect in their practice. The inside of the sheet, again, similar to the old classroom profiler, purely in how it is set out. Here are the differences. Left-hand side for us is dimension 1, right-hand side, dimension 2, 3, and 4, with student behaviours down the bottom. Terminology, significantly different. So for example, cueing with parallel acknowledgement and classroom profiling is based on the essential skills of classroom management, or it was when I demerged from them in 2016. I don't know if it still is or not. My work is based on decision-making, cognitive load and affect. So let's look at cueing with parallel acknowledgement. The definition from profiling and when I was working with Christine Richmond, I used to get Christine in to train all of my staff when I was based in Mackay. Cueing with parallel acknowledgement is, Carolyn, I love how you're sitting quietly, so that Adam and his group of boys come back on board. Try that today. Carolyn, I love how you're sitting quietly, and you're likely to get other students looking at Caroline and going, don't give a hoot. When we train cue through others in 4D, the focus is on the authentic and intentional interaction with Caroline so that she continues the behaviour and is more likely to do repeated instances in the future. It will double up as a recognise and a reinforce. The likelihood of others coming on board is not an assumption or is not why it is used. So the terminology is quite different. So the sheets may look the same. Is it the same? It is absolutely not. And the foundation on what the work is completely different. So what do we do after an observation? 30 minutes in a classroom. This is the tool that we use to link confidentiality for teachers with accountability for schools. So when we have the conversation and the observation with a teacher, both remain confidential within that interaction, 2 people. When we do the reflection session, this is the sheet we use, and based on what teachers state to us, and this is an open, transparent process, so they know that what's on this sheet can be shared by them with their leadership team or their line managers. So the purpose is we create either a celebration or challenge based on the data. We link it to the specific data on the sheet so they know where to look this time and future episodes or observations. And we set a goal with which the teacher is happy to share. Now, the reason being, it then means leadership teams can check in with, why did we get Caroline and her team in? What is the benefit, the impact, and what are my teachers doing specifically? So this is our linking tool for confidentiality with accountability. But what do principals get? This is one of, there are 5 data reports. It compares scans. And what it does is it looks at the frequency, because the frequency is what we found. And this is where the research comes into it. When you do research, you can share information that you know is valid and reliable. So we can, to the minute, share what teachers do differently that have less disruption for every single skill that is on the observation sheet. When this comes back, it is de-identified. So no teacher can be identified within the data for the whole school. We have multiple different coding formats so that schools can track progress over time. And when we have, let's just say we look at referring and restating curriculum, when you look at the bright pink circle on your screen, what we do is our first lot of data sets might say, we are doing this wonderfully. Yet when we look at this data set between 10 staff, we can see that only 4 of our teachers, 5 of our teachers are doing it with high frequency, the others are not. So between all these data sets, what schools get when we do whole school scans is the ability to plan where they're spending professional development funds, what their focuses are on, and how we then create what we call the implementation of sprints, marathons, and agreements. So with a school, I have 2 data consultants, and after we've done a whole school scan, they work with you on things that are sprints. They are short-term impact where you will see change within weeks. Marathons, and you can see this is one from Thangul, marathons are about, for them it was creating the induction process for new staff. Agreements are, and I'm thinking of a school we were in this term, agreements are those things that our policy and procedure says that we do, but for this short sprint, we're putting it to the side so teachers can focus intentionally on the work we need to do. Where does it come from? Effective classroom decision-making. The 4D strategy you can see on the left-hand side, instruct, scan, interact, where we do it when we gain attention, curriculum, behaviour. All of our workshops are based on creating this simple 3-step process for teachers to realise when they can change their behaviour. When the adult changes, it changes the environment. We then create pulse checks. Pulse checks are for measuring impact in 3 to 5 week cycles. And this is just an example of it. This is what myself and our data consultants will do with your leadership team. So what is new? Research is quite honestly the difference. When you have research within anything we do, you have evidence on that practice. We have found frequency of actions are the difference between teachers who have disruption and those with less. We can detail what is different and how it is different. We can share how that difference works. We know the balance and what it needs to be different for impact. And we can share what you trade with one to make the difference. So what 4D schools do differently? We become educators instead of disciplinarians. We use the same tools as every other teacher, we just use them differently. There is consistency and involvement of all staff. When I work in some of my schools, when we do our student free days, they have sessions for the groundsmen, for the cleaners, for the front office staff, because we want to create a culture of how we set a standard and we interact with our students and our parents and our community and each other. Accountability is expected across all employees. On the screen is a selection of principals. I've put Heather Murray there. She's the executive principal at Kerwin High. Please email me if you'd like to contact any of these guys so I can give them a heads up. They don't want everyone just ringing in. Lee Dyer, principal at a state high school. Sally Hawkes has been a principal at a number of schools that I've worked in, 2 particularly. Stacey Bowe is principal at Lowood State High, and again, I've worked with her for quite a few years. 2 primary schools I've popped up there, Fiona Connor and David Paul from a Catholic primary school. You can see down the bottom, we're currently in 138 schools. I think when I made this PowerPoint, there's a few more now. If you'd like any details, please email me. My email is at the bottom, caroline@carolineblackley.com. Have a look at the website. Any more information that you need, very happy to have a phone call, 0439 001 911, or flick me an email and we can connect when it suits you. I hope this has been helpful.